You're listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.
Bill Moyer.
Well, good afternoon.
How you doing? Good to see you again, my friend.
Doing well. Good to see you.
I'd like to apologize for the catastrophe that was my directions.
That was not a problem. I apologize for setting you back so far.
No. This is what I'm doing today. I was trying to understand your location, and I didn't understand where I was. So, but you were literally, I think, 3 miles away.
Yeah.
So there's a weird name change in the road. So
Yeah. When we came down that lane and then turned on Bulverde Road again and came right here, I thought I was right here the whole time.
You know what? But when you were kind of describing it to me, I was thinking of a whole different road, so I was just as lost. But how was your day? You had some meetings today, didn't you?
Yeah, days have been real good. It was a class on neuro-linguistic programming.
Okay.
And it was the first time I took the class with this particular instructor, and it was pretty interesting. Some pretty good stuff.
Okay, good.
And it blends very nicely in with hypnosis.
And so explain to everybody what you do. The people that haven't heard the first podcast that we did together, you're a hypnotherapist.
I am a hypnotherapist. By trade, I'm a nurse. And one of the things that I wanted to do as I got older and didn't want to put so much strain on my physical being was to get into something that was less strenuous. Aside from that, I had a real strong interest in the body-mind connection and how much control we actually have over ourselves by use of our mind. And so that led me into hypnotherapy.
And how long have you been doing it?
I've been doing it now for about 12 years.
Okay.
And it's been very satisfying, definitely the most satisfying thing I've ever done.
Well, I know when we did it, and I talked about it on the first podcast, I went into it not knowing what to expect, but I do know you made me cry twice. And it was to kind of get me to be a little less anxious about a dental appointment I was going to. And I was actually talking to somebody just earlier, a lady that works here, and we were talking about that podcast. And I told her how it really helped to calm me and not be so anxious about that appointment. I had 4 wisdom teeth pulled out that day. And this is, I probably should have called you. I'm probably glad I didn't call you. But I had a root canal done probably a month ago now. And my wife kept telling me, you need to call Bill. I canceled on one, I guess endodontist is what they're called, maybe. I forget what the actual profession is, but I canceled on them 3 times. So they kicked me out of their queue. And so I had to find a new dentist. So I called my wife's brother-in-law, and he used to be a dentist, and he gave me some advice on who to talk to. So I went, and I forget the name of the office, but the gentleman there was real young. He was probably in his late 20s, early 30s. And I tried everything to get out of there. I tried rescheduling him. I said, hey, we can do it in a week. It's just, and I come across as being silly, but in actuality, I have a lot of anxiety toward it. And so it's not even so much the pain, because it's not really even that painful when they numb you and whatever else.
Right.
I just have this weird gagging thing that happens. Like my sinuses start running down the back, and I get real uncomfortable. I start coughing, and you have everybody's hands and tools and all kinds of. So when I think about the process before I even get to the dentist, I start getting real anxious. So he ended up doing a good job. But I should have probably called you.
Well, you got through just fine.
We talked about different techniques and of like, I guess, trying to meditate and try and calm yourself. So I find myself doing that more and more. I'm not the best at it, but I do notice it when I try and control my breathing. My heart rate settles down, And I just have to start putting things out of my head and just go through the motions, because once we're in it, it's not bad at all. So
Right.
the dentist did say, I said, that I had a massive mouth. He said, you have a huge mouth and huge teeth. And the roots were, I think, 25 millimeters, maybe. And he said, typically, he says, we never see anything over 20. And you had 3. So I told him, I said, you should see what it would do to a cheeseburger with these teeth. So what else have you been up to?
Well, aside from that, I'm just kind of expanding the business and adding a few more methodologies like neurolinguistic programming to the process. And,
what is that exactly?
That is a simplified definition. It's a method of communication that you use with yourself and with others. And with practice, you can employ the aspects of NLP to improve your communications. And a simple example is if you think about in a conversation, most of us use a variety of types of terms, and we call it VAK, visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. So, for example, if someone were to say to you, I see what you mean, that's a visual connotation. So they're using a visual submodality. If they say, that doesn't sound right, or that doesn't click with me, that's an auditory. If they say, I can't grasp what you're saying, that's a kinesthetic. So if you are in just say we're in a sales position, and you're having your conversation, you're trying to make your sale, and you notice that somebody is speaking more in a visual kind of an aspect, and your methodology is more auditory, you're not going to be communicating with them very well. They're not going to get what you're saying. So if you can kind of key into whatever their preferred method of communication is, and nobody is just one single method. Nobody's just visual or auditory or kinesthetic, we're all a mix, but we do have a preference. So if you can key into that preference and you start speaking their language using their terms, then they get a feeling of like, oh, wow, this guy gets me. He understands me. I really like this guy.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting because, not to put out too much information, but I recently had a job review that didn't go as well as I would have liked. But I will say this, one thing that I didn't understand, there was a few things I didn't understand, but one thing that I didn't understand, and over time, as I spent more time thinking about it, and and that day and a couple of days after that, we had some different things happen. But I kept telling my wife, I kept telling her it's so weird because we both want the same thing. We're just not understanding what each of us is trying to communicate to each other.
Right.
And it kind of really threw a monkey wrench in the conversation because it was like we were on two different pages, but at the end of what we were trying to convey to each other would have been the same outcome. So yes. I wonder if I'd have put a little more thought into this kind of thing, maybe we could have communicated that a little bit better.
It might have gone a little smoother because that's not an uncommon observation when you're both trying to accomplish the same thing, and you're just not going out about it exactly the same way, or you're just not communicating what you're doing in exactly the same way. And that can lead to some misunderstandings. So it would be beneficial to be more aware of the way somebody presents or...
Well, I will tell you, Bill, there was quite a bit of misunderstanding and got real close to some furniture moving. So.
Okay.
No, but that's interesting because as I get older, I try and, I don't know, I still always have that little bit of son of a bitch in me, right? And I like it. I like having it. I hope to never lose it. But I try to be more receptive to how people communicate to me and how I'm trying to communicate to people. Because, when you're younger, especially when you have an attitude like mine, when you're younger, you want to fight everybody. Everything wants to be an argument. And as you get older, you're like, no, I don't want to fight every day. I don't want to argue every day. With my wife or with my siblings or whoever. I don't want to have this daily push pull kind of thing. Right. Especially when it comes to us just not communicating well enough to understand that we're going in the same direction. Right. So I put more effort into that. I don't know that I'm the best at it. I'm just I just continue to try and push in that direction. But I guess so are you.
Yeah.
So
well, you bring up another really interesting point when you say there's that little bit of an SOB in you. Okay, and in our industry we call that parts. There are many aspects of your being. You're not exactly the same person when you're at work as you are when you're at home with your wife, and that part of you that you described as an SOB is another aspect of your being. And in many cases, we also have things that you could call the child in you, that part of you that wants what you want when you want it. And there's that self-critic that really gets on your case when you're not doing what you think you should be doing, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And all of those various parts of your being have a place. And they all want to do something that's to your benefit. But sometimes their methodology is not exactly the same, and you can have an inner conflict. So, for example, if you ever said, a part of me wants to do this, but another part of me thinks that's probably not a good idea, that's an example of a conflict in the parts within you. And getting back to what your example was, that little SOB in you, it has an appropriate use and appropriate place. There are certain circumstances when it would be real handy to have that SOB. Okay, and you can employ that, knowing that that's there, knowing that you have that aspect. You can hold it in reserve, so to speak, so right at the right opportunity, when it's needed, you can bring it forth in force.
So then I shouldn't lead with that SOB.
Most cases, probably not.
When I was younger, that was my, I don't know if it was like a defense mechanism. I think a lot of times we don't want to let people in. I grew up in a small town. We had a really tight circle of friends that were really, really close. And so they know everything about you, you know everything about them. So there's a lot of trust there. So as I got older and I moved to larger cities, I always found, not that I was standoffish, but I was less prone to let somebody into that circle because the people that were in there knew absolutely everything about me, right? So it's not easy to just let somebody that you've met, through work or whatever else to say, hey, come in and socialize with us and be a part of this and get to know, even the little bitty aspects of myself. So I've always kind of struggled with letting people into that. Now, once they do, I have this weird little thing where I don't do gray areas very well. We may have talked to them about that before. But like, I'm either turned on or I'm turned off, right? And both of them are extreme. Either I'm super quiet hanging out in the corner and I'm a wallflower, or I'm the loudest person in the room and I demand everybody's attention. There's nothing in between that. And that's kind of, my wife says that's a character flaw. But
a character flaw?
That's what she thinks.
Well, I think under the given circumstances, it can be a strength. You can use it as a strength.
Tell her, Bill.
Yeah, if you want to sit back and just kind of observe what's going on, and that's a natural thing, especially if you're in a new surrounding or you're around people that you're not familiar with. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to jump out there and kind of be the center of attention when you don't know what kind of response you're going to get from those around you. So I don't see anything wrong with that.
What is your opinion on? Now I've got a couple of things to talk to you about. We kind of talked about it over the phone. We'll get to that stuff. But
okay,
what is your opinion on? I guess people, depending on your age group, I guess people reintroducing themselves into society, or being a younger person trying to introduce yourself into society. I feel like when COVID hit, there was this mass push for everybody to stay away from each other, stay home. And even today, whatever people's opinions are on the processes or even the masks or the shot or whatever it is, I still see a lot of mostly younger people wearing masks to school or at the mall or wherever they go. I used to work at a jail, I guess back in the late 90s, and I kind of turned into a germaphobe back then. So to me, hey, wash your hands, antibacterial. If you want to wear a mask, go for it. But I see a lot of younger people doing it, and it's almost as if they're using it to kind of protect themselves from being social, And how does somebody kind of wiggle their way out of, I guess, that funk that we got into during COVID, where we do kind of avoid each other more, and we're kind of trying to get out of that? Is there something thought processes people can go into, or what can they do to kind of, I guess, get rid of some of that anxiety? I have anxiety about certain things. People have anxieties, social anxieties. My wife says I have that too, and I guess I do. But what is something that we can do to kind of prepare ourselves to get out of the house, be more social?
Yeah. Well, I like the way you put that too, and the fact that you see it more in younger folks. Okay, maybe some folks who at the beginning of the pandemic or just before, they weren't at an age where they were socializing that much with other than their own inner circle, and so trying to break out of that is almost like brand new territory for those folks. So I think one of the things that would be real beneficial is if we were a little bit more tolerant of each other, rather than making you the SOB because you are wearing a mask or because you're not. Just acceptance, being less likely to impose whatever our thoughts are on somebody else. If you want me to social distance, why should I attempt to negate that just to aggravate you? That sort of thing. But the one thing that I think is important for us to kind of realize is that, the pandemic was pretty devastating, and it affected a large number of us all at one time. And yet, if you really think about it, the pandemic was nothing more than just another life situation, something that life threw at us, and we have to figure out how to deal with. So from an individual standpoint, what's the difference between facing the pandemic or facing a devastating diagnosis or a breakup, a divorce, death of a loved one, loss of a job, or any other of the challenges that life throws at us? How do we build resilience so that no matter what we face, we're able to take whatever lessons come from it and carry on as best we can?
How does somebody, when I think about building resilience, I've got a different, I guess, formula for that than somebody else would. My formula was always my friends and my siblings. Very, very close, very, very loving-ish, but yet we were very demanding on each other, right?
Sure.
And to the point where borderline bullying. But it was bullying when it comes from somebody that's loved you 99% of the time, and then they give you a hard time 1% of the time. You go, he's being silly. I know he loves me.
Right.
But for somebody that doesn't have that, I guess, that small community and that little culture that's been built among people around them, what's the formula, and maybe there's not one, but what is the process that somebody can begin heading in that direction to build resilience when they don't have that social structure around them already?
It has to do with a baseline of self-esteem, positive self-image, and an understanding of your own self-worth. So that when someone is attempting to demean you or bully you or put you down in some way, you can kind of put it in a perspective that it's probably got nothing to do with you and has got more to do with the insecurities of the person who's trying to impose it on you.
Sure.
And that takes a while to develop that. And if you have a proper kind of a home setting, as it were, some proper upbringing and education to help you in that direction, and then other than that, it takes experiencing it, and I like also what you said when, Those who are close in your circle, if they start pounding on you and picking on you, you take it a different way than if it's a stranger who's making comments about you.
Yeah.
And that's natural, okay? And again, the idea of taking whatever they present, whatever they say, whatever they throw at you, as though it had some kind of meaning and as though there were an element of truth to it, that's when it begins to hurt. So if you can take it from a perspective of, again, it's not about you. It's about whatever this other person feels or is compelled to kind of throw at you because of their own problems. Okay, then you might be able to take it in a different way. If it comes from a situation where it's not your inner circle, but it's not somebody who's a total stranger, then you have an opportunity to make a choice about how close do you want that person to be.
Sure.
Anything from allowing them to get closer to severing the relationship if you feel the need to.
You know, it's funny because my wife and I are almost the same person. We've got way more similarities than we do differences. And when we get to points where we argue and it gets less nice, after time goes by, we always kind of readdress each other, and it's a matter of, hey, I see what I didn't like. I know I do that, and part of me not getting angry with you is because I know I do that, and I don't like that I do that, and it's something that we always kind of circle back to. Sometimes it takes a day, sometimes it takes a month, but we always know that, hey, that's come from a place where I'm not happy that I do those things, or I behave that way, or I've done that in the past. I didn't like that about myself. So
yeah. And it's important that you recognize that, because most people don't. Most people look outward as, you are doing this to me, and never even taking that they're taking stock of their own behaviors. So the fact that you guys can do that together means that you have a pretty strong relationship.
And I think it's come with age and years being together. You know, initially, no, it was just let's fight and never circle back. Yeah. But it's come with time, and I guess that's like a lot of things. One thing I want to talk to you about is self-esteem. I've got a weird. Now, when I tell you about, and I understand this, when I talk about things that I do or things how I process things, I approach it as if I am not typical, right? And so when it comes to self-esteem, I feel like I have a lot of it. Now, not to say that I don't get emotional or have anxiety or all those other things, but I understand that those things are there, and that they're, you know, another thing that I kind of approach it with is I know what I'm really good at, and I know what I'm not good at all. So I know the things that I like, I know the things that I dislike. And not that I avoid the things that I'm not good at or the things that I dislike. I do. You know, I do avoid those things. But for the most part, when I'm confronted by the things that I'm not good at or the things that make me uncomfortable, I already knew that I was going to be uncomfortable. So it doesn't set me back as far as I think it would set me back had I not acknowledged where my flaws are at, you know? And I think a lot of that comes from the people that I grew up with, right? It was always, you know, especially my siblings, we were very good at force feeding each other our flaws, you know? And after a while I was like, I hear it all the time. You know,
I know that.
And so I think that kind of helps build, for me, it helped build my self-esteem, you know? And so when I go into something new, or I go, let's say I were to start a new job, or I were to go hang out with new people, it takes me a while to do that. But when I get in there, I get really confident because I know my limitations. You know, I know where I'm strong, I know where I suck, and you're not going to tell me anything I don't know. And you said it a minute ago, I think a lot of what hurts is when we're told something that we know is true. that we haven't addressed ourselves,
Right.
And
right.
for me, there's a lot of things that I know that are negatives about me that I've addressed a long time ago, and I think that helps me. I'll give you an example. Our nephew, Andre's son,
Yeah.
beautiful sister-in-law, he owns a gym.
Yeah.
And so recently he's like, hey, man, you need to get back in the gym. You're getting older. You're fat. We need to get you back in the gym. I haven't told him this, but the first 2 times that I went to the gym here recently, I didn't go inside. Drove all the way up there, pulled up, parked, looked in there and said, holy shit, I can't go in there. I'm not going in there. Too out of shape. I'm too out of shape. I know that I'm going to, this is the other thing, is I know that I'm fat. I know what I look like. That's a flaw. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, well, I'm so out of shape. I'm going to get in there and I'm not even going to do 15 minutes of exercise and I'm going to be ready to leave. These people have been in there 2 hours, Yeah. So the first 2 days, I went, and like I said, I parked, and I deliberately went late. And I was like, oh, they're fixing to close. I come up with all these excuses not to go inside. And so I didn't go. The third day that I went, I made sure I went in through the back door. The front was packed. The parking was packed. And so I went in through the back door. And getting inside was the hard part.
Right, yes.
Being in there was not difficult. I know my limitations, how much I could do, how much I can't. So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to put, these are the exercises. These are the exercises I know I can do. And I'm going to push myself really hard. I did it. I was there, I don't know, maybe 40, 45 minutes. And then I got done, went home. And I've continued to go back, sometimes in the evening, sometimes, in the middle of the day. But it's the hard part is pushing myself past that threshold where I've got this mental block of I can't do this, and that's paper thin. But I feel like a lot of times we put that veil of, hey, I can't do this, and don't realize how thin that boundary is. And if we just cross it, it's not as bad as we thought it was.
Exactly. The self-doubt can really slow us down, can be quite a barrier to try to overcome. And there is an old saying about the hardest part of working out is getting to the gym.
Yeah.
And once you get there, it's not so bad. And I think, too, that when you talk about all the hassle that you guys gave each other as you were growing up, and you accepted some of those things as truth, and there's an element of truth in some of the stuff that they said, but it came from a place of love, like you said. It came from a place of somebody that no matter what they say to your face, they got your back. Okay? And now you're going into a setting where you don't know these people. You don't know who you're going to encounter. You don't know what their impression is going to be of you coming into the door. And so if you didn't have that solid foundation that we talked about of self-image, of self-esteem, you still wouldn't be going to the gym.
Yeah.
You would have never crossed that threshold. But you had the confidence. It was just a matter of, and the hardest part for any of us to get started working out is getting started, okay? I was in Taekwondo for 31 years, and the pandemic closed us down, and now it's been almost 3 years since I've been out, and I'm kind of itching to find another school.
Yeah.
And that's as far as it's gotten so far.
Now, you've got some credentials, don't you?
In the way of...
In martial arts.
I have a 7th degree black belt in Taekwondo.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
So what got you into Taekwondo?
A friend and I, that fellow that I worked with many, many years ago, we decided we wanted to do something to work out. And some of the things that I wanted to do, he didn't want to do. Some of the things that he wanted to do, I didn't want to do. And we finally settled on martial arts. And we picked a Taekwondo school. And we decided... his idea was we were going to get at it until we got our black belts, and then we were going to go jump out of airplanes. And as it turned out, we got our black belts, and he quit, and I didn't, and neither one of us has yet to jump out of an airplane. So.
You know what's so interesting is, like, you said 31 years ago, I feel like a lot of times we get into these... for me, going back to the gym, right? if I stick with it long enough, what is that going to look like in 10 years? For you, spending 31 years in Taekwondo, how it changed your life. And it was just you and a buddy wanting to get fit, wanting to stay healthy.
Yep.
And it was a big part of your life. I mean, I think a lot of times we take things for granted. We take, even though that can be looked at as like a social event, right? We're being social, me and my buddy, we're going to go exercise, we're going to meet people. Right. And now it was a major part of your life. You know, so you never know where that's going to come from, I guess.
Exactly.
Things that are going to direct our lives. So.
Yeah, and even if you have a set goal, like our supposed goal was to get our black belts, what you don't consider is the person that you become in the process of getting there. The things that you learn about yourself, what are you capable of, things that you may have never have even considered that you'd be able to do, and you end up doing them anyway. And it's pretty interesting what happens to our mental and psychological growth as you're going through those kind of processes.
And those are all self-esteem builders.
Absolutely.
Those are all little building blocks. And I think we take that for granted. We look for an opportunity or looking for something that's going to be the fix. And it's like this wall behind you. It's a wall because of all the little bits and pieces that they put together to make the wall. Right. So it was interesting because I was just thinking earlier, how do we build self-esteem? And that's exactly it. Doing things that make you uncomfortable, finding out where your shortcomings are and where your successes are going to be, and not being shy of the things that are going to make us fail. And I think that's where I fail a lot is I avoid those things. If I know I'm going to not do good at something, as I've gotten older, even maybe when I was younger, I always tried to avoid them. And now I'm kind of like, well, let's just see what that feels like. It's like going to that dentist. When I quit BSing him and finally got the root canal, when we left, I told my wife, I said, that wasn't bad at all.
Yeah. Wish I'd done that a long time ago.
Wish I'd done it a long time ago.
Yeah.
Instead of going through that pain.
Yeah. One of the things I really enjoyed in the martial arts was working with the kids, because a typical kid that we would get would be somebody who probably would be the last one to be chosen for a team, and whatever connotation that brings into your mind with regard to what that kid would be like, and then getting them to be able to do things that they never thought they could do because they never thought they were good enough. Yeah. That was real eye-opening.
And, that's got to be good for a kid to, we haven't been kids in a long time, but for a young person to experience that, I can't even remember what that was like when I was younger, but for a young person to experience that, and it almost turns a switch to go, what else can I do? What else can I be successful at if I can do this? Because I didn't think I could do this, but here I am.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was really a joyful experience when we saw them break their first board.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was amazing just to see the expression on their face. But there was something that you mentioned a few minutes ago that I'd like to address for just a minute. When you talked about failing, I have a philosophy about that. You have never failed at anything. Everything that you have ever done or not done has produced a result, and that's a success. Maybe it was a result you didn't want, and that's a lesson. So everything that you've ever done either got you what you wanted or taught you a lesson. So you learned that if you exhibit a certain behavior, you get a certain result. If you don't like that result, that teaches you to not do that behavior anymore.
Yeah, that's important to I guess, understand as a person, to understand that yourself. It's easy to see somebody else fail, and we watch fighters all the time, right? You get knocked out, you lose a fight, and then a fight later, now they're the champion. You know, we see that, and we don't often apply that to ourselves, that we're capable of failing and being successful after.
Exactly.
I think a lot of times we kind of look at when we're not successful at something, we don't ever want to revisit it. And it's like, well, no, like you just said, think of all the things you just learned out of participating in that. Even though you weren't successful, you participated, and you look at all you've learned.
Exactly.
Go do it again and break that little barrier.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So when I called you the other day, we'll get into this part of it.
Okay.
I was telling the lady that was here earlier, I was like, yeah, we're going to talk about some weird visions that I had. And she looked at me and, okay. She was here with her husband and their baby. They just had a real pretty little baby. And so I wasn't explaining it very well. But when I called you the other day, I was talking to you about something that had happened when I was waking up out of sleep. Mm-hmm. And we'll go back to the first one, because I told you it had happened several years ago. But several years ago, I was getting in bed, and I had just laid down. And when I say just laid down, I don't mean I'd been in bed for about 5 or 10 minutes. I literally just laid down. I closed my eyes. I'm rolling in. I'm covering myself. And I start describing to my wife what I'm seeing with my eyes closed. Mm-hmm. Clear as day. Couldn't hear sound. But I felt like I was in this, and I've never been to Turkey, but I'd imagine this is what a Turkish market looked like. And I was inside of a building with this large opening, and I was watching just the dailies going on. And I'm telling her what people were wearing. I'm telling her what they look like, the beards, the food, the shops. And she says, "You're seeing this?" And I said, "Yeah." And like, even as I turn my head in different directions, I'm seeing different parts of whatever I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. And so as long as I kept it lasted probably 3 to 4, maybe 5 minutes. And I opened my eyes and to close them to see if it'd still be there, and it was gone. Yeah. And so the day I called you, I had just had that happen again, waking up out of sleep. So I've been sleeping in the spare bedroom because I've got this weird, like a shoulder pain or something, and our bed's too soft. Mm-hmm. The purple bed's not for fat folks, Bill.
Okay.
So I'm sleeping on a harder bed. She comes in and wakes me up. And like I told you, I woke up and I was looking up, and I closed my eyes and I see like this, it was almost like a tear, right? Mm-hmm. There wasn't any definitive boundary to it. It was more like a tear. And the longer I kept my eyes closed, the bigger it got. And it was like I could see almost like a hunting lease, right? It looked like wood paneling, animal mounts on the wall. I can see people off to my peripheral walking around and their shadows. And again, couldn't hear anything. But the longer I sat there with my eyes closed, the bigger the picture got. And so I opened my eyes, I told her what I was seeing, and closed them again. And it happened probably for about 4 to 5 minutes. But this time, every time I closed my eyes, it would start over. And it would basically shrink back, and it would grow, and I could see more of the picture again. But we were talking about that, and I don't understand what's going on there. Am I still asleep, or what's happening?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's possible that you could be in that sort of dream state in between sleep and awake, where you're just kind of drifting and your thoughts are random. Where those images may have come from, in my opinion, could have been influenced by what you've been reading or watching recently. Could it be a reflection of some past life or some genetic memory? Maybe.
Yeah.
We don't know. Those are some areas that are interesting to explore. If you have ever had a DNA test to find out if your ancestry may have been from that area.
I think everybody that I'm related to is from Mathis, Texas. Everybody. So that's my lineage, is onion pickers or whatever they used to pick back then.
All Texan.
Yeah. But no, I've never done that. But it was interesting when you talked about the what was it, the ancestral.
The ancestral, the DNA, the
yes.
Genetic memory.
Genetic memory.
Yeah.
So when you talked about that, what is that exactly?
Well, the fact that we are here, we came from our parents, who came from their parents, who came from their parents, who came from their parents, and on and on and on. And we have inherited genes from millennia ago. Okay. And if you think about in the animal kingdom, there are certain things that animals just know what to do. It's an instinct. Where does that come from? It's got to be something in their DNA, something in their genes that tells them how to behave, how to find food, how to protect themselves, how to hide, whatever it happens to be. And so their ancestry is not that much different from ours in that they had parents who had parents who had parents who had parents, etc. And so there's this theory of a possibility of inheriting some of this information from our DNA, from our ancestors. And so maybe you had ancestors who were in those types of situations, and it was passed down through the DNA. Now, why is it showing up when it's showing up for you? Really good question.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Well, that's interesting that you talk about that, because do you think that when an animal is born with that instinct to provide for itself, do you think that was bred out of us? Like, if we have the baby I saw today, without the love, affection, and attention of the parents, the baby won't survive.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
But if you left a bobcat out in the middle of my sister's ranch, eventually it would go find food and it would live.
Right.
So is that something that's possibly been bred out of us?
I think that there's a certain amount of truth that could be found in that. We tend to be the most vulnerable in our infancy of pretty much any animal because there are certain things that they know to do. Of course, we're born with certain things that we know to do too. When we are first born and we're put to the breast, we pretty much suckle. Okay, so we know that. We tend to, I don't know exactly what else we might know.
I guess eventually, when we learn to roll over and learn to crawl, I mean, those are things that a baby seems to do instinctually too. So
yeah, and there's recently I read that there's an instinct that we are afraid of loud sounds right from the get-go. And where does that come from?
Yeah.
But I see what you mean. Like if we took an infant and stuck it out there, it wouldn't survive for very long. But neither would most other critters if they didn't figure out pretty quick how to find something to eat.
yeah.
So I don't know how far we are from that.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's interesting to explore, some of that genetic background type of things.
Have you done any research in that kind of thing?
Not formally. I've read a lot of opinions and a lot of possibilities. Haven't really delved into my own deep research with that regard. I do tend to think that we have information from somewhere that we are born with some and we gather as we grow. Where that comes from, you can call it God, you can call it universal intelligence, you can call it nature versus nurture, or you can call it Fred. I don't care what name you give it. It's just seems that there are some, the driving forces. Okay, we have two main driving forces. First one is to survive. The second one is to make more of us. So those are instinctual things that are put into us. Now, how we go about it, we're a bit weaker at that than most other species, in my opinion. And again, getting back to what we were talking about a minute ago with the ability for us to survive on our own, we don't come into the world with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just I find it when I have dreams like that. I even go through this weird thing. Not to get too crazy on you, but there's been a few times where I feel like I'm maybe in that, and it's possible, like we mentioned earlier, that being halfway in that sleep state and that awake state. I've told my wife there's been several times where I'll hear something, or somebody will call my name, or I'll hear a voice, and one of the most dramatic ones that happened was about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I was in bed and I remember hearing my dad's voice. Mm-hmm. And he was in the hallway. He said it like I was in high school with the deeper voice. As he's gotten older, his voice has kind of softened. But I told my wife, I said, I woke up and I walked through the house, and I knew he wasn't there because he lives in another town. And so I had this heavy emotion that kind of came over me. And I ended up going to the spare bedroom, and I started blubber crying, right? Mm-hmm. And so my wife comes in, and she's like, what is wrong? And I told her, I said, I have no clue. I said, but I heard my dad's voice, and it sounded serious, but it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was just crying. So we were sitting there, and I ended up calling him and checking on him. But it seems like from time to time, I have these weird little strange experiences where, and again, it could be half asleep, could be half awake, I don't know. But I get these weird experiences where I hear my name, or I hear somebody say, when you stand next to a wall and you can feel that the wall's there. Yes. I told my wife, this was probably about a month ago. I said I was laying in bed and I felt somebody right in front of me, and I literally heard the word, hey, like a little kid. And so I woke up and went to go check to see if it was maybe her calling me or something, but it wasn't. But so I don't know where these things come from. It could be part sleep state or something, but it's just it's something that it's been happening more and more frequently, it seems like, as of the past, 5 to 6 years. But
yeah, there are a lot of examples of that. And most of the examples that you read about that end up being in a book would be something like you heard your father's voice and you had that reaction that you had, and then you called him and found out that he had been in an accident or that he had had a heart attack or something like that. In your case, everything was okay. So why did that occur? Well, we don't know. Maybe he was thinking about you. But there are too many examples of that to just kind of dismiss it out of hand. Yeah. And there is, in quantum physics, there is this concept of we are all linked ever since the beginning, where there's a connection with all of us. We're all made of the same stuff. We're all from the same stuff. And once connected, we can never be disconnected. And one of the things that they've done in support of that is they take a particle, an atom or some sort of a particle, and they cut it in half, and they send it some distance apart. And when, in their description, they say they tickle one half of the particle, the other one responds immediately, as though it had been tickled. And what do they mean by tickled? I have no idea. They do something to it to stimulate
to respond,
it. Yeah.
Stimulate.
And both particles respond.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so, it's some interesting stuff to explore. Why do things occur like you hear about a grandmother who lifts up a car that her kid is trapped under? Yeah. Where does that come from? Things like you were describing earlier when you hear somebody's voice. And we've all had the experience of, we think about somebody that we've not been in contact with in a long time, and within a few minutes the phone rings, and guess who it is? Yeah. The person that you were just thinking about. Where does that come from?
I guess at times we ignore how connected we are to our surroundings and the people in our lives too. Yeah. When we did the previous podcast and we did the therapy session, the thing that got me to really emotional was seeing people from my past that played a big role in me growing up. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the emotional part of it was maybe a little bit of guilt, maybe a little bit of, maybe not so much guilt, but maybe a little bit of guilt, where I felt as though those connections weren't as strong as they had been at one point. Mm-hmm. And I needed those connections to be stronger. I'm still not the best at it, but after that session, I made a point to always try and call my friends and family and stay in close contact, but it gets difficult. People's lives get busy. Mm-hmm. People have children, people have events, kids get bigger. You got to take them to this, that, and the other. But even after our session, a lot of the people that were in my, what would I call that? Or in my hypnosis session, my little vision out of that.
Yes.
I made a point to reach out to them and make sure they were okay, because part of that also was me thinking, maybe there's some people in this around this fire that I was seeing that maybe I wasn't as connected to as I had been, and making sure they were okay. You know, I try and do a better job of that, but I'm not always the best at checking up on folks, I guess.
Well, life gets so demanding. We have so many responsibilities and so many obligations, and we all go off in our different directions and things. But you still have those connections, okay? They don't go away.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you had the experience of when you did contact them, it was just like nothing was ever in between.
That's pretty regular.
You were right back where you were before, and that doesn't go away. So I think the link is always there, and the fact that you reached out, I'm sure, was important to them as it was to you. But it also, I think, reinforced the concept that what you had then is still there, even though there's a distance situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something that I think a lot of people, I know people that struggle with that. I think a lot of times we tend to say, hey, they didn't call me, so I'm not calling them, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's, the older I get, the more I try and help people not focus on that,
Right.
because that doesn't do anybody any good.
No.
Nobody gets back to where they need to be by having that kind of attitude. So
Exactly. Yeah. Holding grudges or making assumptions like that. They didn't call me, so why should I bother? That sort of thing. That doesn't help anybody, and it just hurts your own self.
yeah.
So
So some of the services you provide. Tell me again some of the stuff you give. You give the hypnotherapy sessions.
hypnotherapy, and I do everything from what I call a mind massage to smoking cessation, weight management. What I really have gotten into now is forgiveness therapy, and
That's got to be huge.
That's pretty. It's pretty complicated. Well, let me qualify that. It's not so much complicated, except from the perspective of the person who's going through it. Sometimes we get stuck. We can't seem to progress. We can't seem to be successful. We can't seem to accomplish things. We don't feel like we're where we thought we would be at this time in our lives. And sometimes there are connections to events of our past. Maybe we didn't have the best upbringing. Maybe we didn't have parents who were supportive and encouraging. Maybe there were a lot of limitations. Maybe we were picked on by people that we weren't close enough to know that they were coming at us with love. And maybe we started to buy into that possibility that we're not good enough, we're not strong enough, we're not tall enough, we're not short enough, we're not big enough, we're not small enough, whatever the limitation is. Exactly right, exactly right. And so when we get into dealing with letting go of the past, it has to do with the realization that whatever happened in the past doesn't define who you are now. It had an influence on your development, certainly, but it isn't happening now. It was, and it isn't now. And so you don't have to continue to live your life hanging on to those experiences.
Yeah.
So keep the lessons learned, absolutely, but let go of the stuff.
Are you finding more and more clients that need that?
A lot. And somewhat surprising, I'm finding more and more clients who are seeking that. If someone is not ready, because the forgiveness therapy has to do with letting go and forgiving everybody for everything. And if they ever come back with, well, I can forgive everybody except there was that one guy that what he did, I could never, well, then they're not ready.
Yeah.
Because you got to let it all go. The only way that it lives on is taking up space in your own mind.
Why do we hold on to that stuff? It's kind of, I'll be honest with you, I hang on to a lot of mess. And not, it's more internally. It's not so much like, hey, I hate Brenda and I'm never talking to her again, right? It's not that.
Right.
It's more of me internally holding on to certain things. And I kind of again, I think I'm pretty good at understanding the positives and the negatives that I hold on to. Mm-hmm. And I know they're negative. I know my life would benefit to let go of certain things. But I kind of call it, it's kind of like one of those weighted blankets, right?
Right.
It's heavy, but it's comfortable. Mm-hmm. You know, do people hold on to those things because of I don't even want to call it comfortable for them. It's comfortable to me, but they're just used to carrying that anchor. Is that what it is?
There's a certain amount of justification that goes on there. I have a right to be angry because of what that person did to me. Okay. He was wrong. He never should have done that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's true. That doesn't change with forgiveness therapy. It doesn't condone what they did. It doesn't say that it was okay. But it's a concept of, I'm not going to carry it anymore. You hurt me once, I'm not going to let you keep hurting me by carrying it around. So there's a certain amount of justification that we are entitled to our anger, to our frustration.
Why do we want it, though? Why do we want that anger so much sometimes?
I think it has to do with our familiar zone, part of it. You mentioned something about being comfortable. I've stopped calling it a comfort zone because most people aren't comfortable in it. But it's a familiar zone. I know what it feels like in this little bubble of mine, and I don't know what it's like outside of it. So I know what I'm dealing with, so I'm going to just keep it just the way it is. So they're unwilling to let go and to explore what could be outside that little bubble. And I think a part of it, too, is our culture. Our society is...
Oh, Mexicans are terrible at that. I bet all your clients are Mexican.
Well, it goes beyond the ethnicity, I'm afraid. This concept of if somebody wrongs you, get revenge.
Yeah.
Okay. Or, you don't let it go. You hold on to that and you never let them do it again.
Is it because we feel that we're taken advantage of, so to speak, in that it's almost like, how dare you do that to me kind of thing?
Yes, it certainly is. And a part of it also when we do the therapy is setting up boundaries, because that's another thing that we're not real good at. Setting boundaries, figure out what your non-negotiables are in your relationship. What is not okay? And then don't let anybody cross that boundary. So it's about not letting it be okay for anybody to do whatever they want to you, but those who have wronged you, you let them go, and you allow them to be in your life to the degree that you're willing to allow them to be in your life. So if they want to continue to beat on you, to keep hurting you, then that's time to sever that relationship.
What's a healthy way to do that without burning the house down and punching somebody in the neck? What's your healthy way of doing that? To acknowledge that that's happening, because that's a process, right? There's a process of, me and you, for example, right? You're doing something that I don't like, and you're doing it regularly. Yeah. So that means there's time that's gone by. Now I've got to make you aware that you're doing this, because you may not know. Right. For years I always said, how does somebody not know what they're doing? Well, there's a lot of people that don't get it. Right. So now we've got to have that conversation. Now the time, there's time for that. There's time for you to continue doing what you're doing. Now we're to the point where I'm going to cut it off, but it's been months, or it's been years, or it's been decades.
Yeah.
What's a healthy way to handle that, even that whole process? Does it have to go that long? Is it something where it happens immediately and you say, hey, a month later, I've severed this relationship? I guess it also kind of comes back to, what this person is in your life. It's different when it's somebody you met from work as opposed to your mother, know? So what's a healthy way to handle all that?
Well, the healthiest way, in my opinion, is to address it as soon as it gets to a point where it is no longer something that you're willing to tolerate. Okay, even those folks, when you talked about as you were growing up, they would call you names, they would pick on you, and you knew it was coming from a place of love. And if any one of them were to throw some kind of comments at you or treat you a certain way that crossed the line, you knew it. You felt it. And so it would be appropriate to say, hey, I don't appreciate when you treat me that way, talk to me that way, whatever it happens to be. They do it again, you tell them again. And you decide when this is enough. I'm going to sever this relationship. And I would never, let me qualify that, almost never recommend someone get a divorce or move out of their house or whatever the case, unless there's physical danger involved. And yet, there comes a time when things that are over the line for you have to be addressed. And that's when counseling comes into play, therapy comes into play. And unfortunately, I have had clients who, due to those types of circumstances, had ended up in divorce. And that's very sad. But again, my opinion, a toxic relationship is a toxic relationship.
Yeah.
Whether it's an old friend, whether it's an acquaintance, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a parent, a child, a sibling, if it's a toxic relationship, it needs to be addressed or terminated.
That this is possibly me making excuses. It's a high likelihood that it is. But for me, like growing up, having those negative encounters, there was never. Now my negative encounters are not going to be the same as somebody else's, right?
Right.
But the negative encounters that I had, to me, and maybe this was me justifying things to not be get into a conflict. But for me, it was almost like this is going to help me when I get older. When I go somewhere, when I leave home, when I go into the world, I've got a thicker layer of skin. I've got some battle armor with me, right. And to me, those negative things were controlled. They were coming from people that I cared for. Like I said, we hack on each other, right. But it was almost like I saw it as, man, this is going to make me stronger, and I'm going to be less naive. I'll be less apt to, be controlled, be forced to do something. Now, again, that was all contributing to the SOB in the corner that was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, that now sometimes he gets in the way. But is that still a negative, or are there sometimes where the negatives are positive?
No, I think that's very positive because you've got to have a thick skin in life.
Yeah.
Life does stuff to you whether you like it or not. And so I think it's those who have not developed an ability to cope with situations in life that end up going out and shooting people.
Yeah. When I was a kid, my dad always told me, I think, and I've said this story before, I think I came home from school one day. I was upset because somebody didn't like me or wasn't my friend or something. I don't know. I was a little kid. And I remember him telling me, hey, don't hang out with that kid. Go hang out with people that like you. And it was such a simple comment. It was almost maybe too simplified because, of course, I'm going to have to see this kid again because we probably in the same classes. But I always kept that in mind, and I always put myself around people that did like me. When we talked earlier about hearing a negative thing from somebody that's, your sister or your brother, it hurts less hearing that same thing from somebody you barely know. That's because it's got some truth to it. But for me, that was never the case because I always remembered that. So to me, it hurt less coming from somebody I didn't know. This person doesn't know me.
Right.
I put less stock in what came from those people than what I did from my closer circle.
Exactly.
And that's just kind of how I try to behave in general. As you get older, you find that the world's not as bad as you think it is. There's monsters in it, but they're not as many as you thought there were. People are kind, people are respectful. They want that back from you. You just have to, be receptive to it, and you need to give it when it's time. But I think when I was younger, I was like, everybody's a monster. This whole place is full of monsters, you know. So I always had that shield up that we talked about. But but a lot of it came from my negative experiences with the people that I cared for, you know. And like I said, it almost felt like it made me, it kind of contributed to my self-esteem. It kind of contributed to, because again, they're telling me my negatives. Well, now I know what those are, you know. So if Joe Blow down the street tells me about my negatives, I've already heard that from people that I love. It doesn't matter coming from you.
Yeah, you already know that stuff. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Well, I think that's a very healthy outlook. So that when, excuse me, when somebody comes along and says something derogatory to you, you can just dismiss it because they don't know who you are. You know.
A lot of times I think it's funny, but then again, I got a very strange sense of humor too. So.
Again, I think it's a healthy sense of humor, you know, and I think that it's detrimental to just accept at face value what someone says to you when they don't even know who you are.
Yeah. One more thing I want to talk to you about, Bill, and I've had this conversation with other people, and I get the feeling I'm gonna hear the same thing, but now that I have you here with me, I gotta ask your opinion on it too. So. This has come up 100 times, so I doubt everybody's listening to every single podcast, so they probably haven't heard it yet. But I had a brother that died several years ago, and so I had my aunt on recently, and we were talking about it, and so she was telling me how he would want me to move on and be happy, right? And I feel that's the route you're going to take, but again, I'm comfortable in some negative things, so. We were always very close. We always hacked on each other. Part of me feels like to carry the... Now, this goes for everybody. Of course, when you lose somebody, it hurts. Right. But for me, it's almost like the pain of losing him in a weird way makes me feel connected to him more so than if I let that pain go. Yeah. So should I keep the pain, Bill?
In my opinion, I think you should keep the memories. I think it'd be safe to let go of the pain. You don't need it to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. If you think about it, if the roles were reversed.
Oh, he forgot about me already.
Yeah, and you're not going to forget. You know, you're always going to remember. You're always going to have that connection. And there's always going to be some feeling of a certain amount of pain at him not being here. And I think that's normal. I think it's natural. I think you shouldn't be concerned about it. And I also think you shouldn't be concerned when the day comes that the pain isn't quite the way it was before, that it tends to lose its edge. Because there's too much other good stuff that you remember.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of plays into the forgiveness thing you were talking about earlier. You know, there's a little bit of me that, hopes I never lose the pain, you know, because pain is a very strong feeling and emotion. And not to say that happiness and love isn't, but it's almost like it's stronger. Right? When you're having a good day, you don't necessarily remember the good day the following week. But when you have a really bad day, you'll remember that for months. Yeah. You know? And so there's this weird little part of me that won't let go of that portion of it. That won't, you know, and it kind of feels, like I said, it almost makes me feel more connected in a weird way. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm completely wrong and I'm way off and I'm carrying this mental weight that I don't need to be carrying. But it almost feels like, again, what we talked about earlier, people not letting go of events that happened to them. You know, I almost feel like I don't want to let it go. You know, I mean, it's the weighted blanket. You know?
Yeah, that's not so unusual either. And I think one of the things you said about pain being such a strong feeling, a strong emotion, and you might consider exploring whether or not you think that holding on to that pain is an indication of how much you care. And you may discover that you can keep the caring, but you don't need so much of the pain.
Yeah. I guess that's something that I have to struggle with, because I think that's exactly it. I feel like the pain and the caring are connected, you know, and it's almost like if I go every day, or maybe not necessarily every day, but if I go, you know, every week, or I get emotional about them, I feel good about it in a weird way.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when I lost my grandmother, I was a little kid, you know. I think I was like 12 or 13. Here at 46, the amount of days that go by that I don't think about my dad's mom, you know, there's quite a few of them. And, you know, they're buried together, so when I go see him, I see her. But at the same time, he died when I was an adult. And I almost feel like, man, I don't want to, I might go a year and not think about grandma. I might go 5 years and not think about grandma. I don't want to do that with him, you know.
Yeah.
I don't want to go a day without it.
Sure.
You know, and maybe that's because it's more recent, but.
And a totally different relationship, too.
Yeah.
An entirely different relationship with your brother than with your grandma. Not that makes grandma's relationship any less. It's just a different kind of a relationship. And there was another aspect of that, holding on to that pain, with that closeness that you feel. You're going to still have moments, okay? Even when you get to a point when you don't have to feel so much of the sharp edge of that pain so frequently, you're still going to have moments where an event will occur that reminds you, or you'll hear a voice that sounds a lot like his, or something that you two used to do will just pop into your mind, and you'll have that feeling again, okay? But it'll be tempered a little bit by the good stuff that went along with that memory, okay? And so I think you will gradually come to not necessarily eliminate the pain, but begin to not need the edge so much.
Yeah, I look forward to that day. I hope, because it sounds more pleasant than the current situation.
Yeah.
But till then, I'm gonna have to hold on to the current situation.
Yeah. And you know, when you talk about you may be totally off the wall and you may be wrong, there's no wrong. You know, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. There's no wrong way. I mean, I think I would have a different kind of a conversation with you if you told me that it was so debilitating that you couldn't go to work, your family's falling apart, you can't concentrate, you can't even drive because you can't focus. Then we're talking about a whole different story.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's not that.
No. So, you know, it's the connection.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to because now I got to ask you, what is mental massage that's stuck in my head?
Well, you had a physical massage, yes, with a masseuse.
Never have.
Never have.
No,
well,
but I know what they are.
Okay. Probably at least some of the folks listening have had physical massage, where you just lay on the table and you relax and you let the masseuse or the masseur do their thing, and afterwards you feel totally relaxed and comfortable. It's a similar kind of a thing I do mentally, when there's not necessarily a specific concern that you want to address, but you want to take some time to just leave the world, if you will, to just kind of let your mind go, okay, and just relax and be at peace. So its intention is simply to bring you a certain amount of peace of mind.
So is it similar to maybe like a type of meditation where you can kind of help remove mental stresses? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, you can call it a guided meditation. That
Okay.
would be another good description for it. I just happen to use the term mind massage.
Well, it works because it's stuck in my head this whole time. Well, Bill, where can people find you? What are your phone number, email address, all that good stuff when they need services that you provide? And kind of run through them again. That way people who are listening can hear them together, what you provide and where they can find you.
Thank you. My business is Life Matters, Hypnotherapy and Life Coaching. My website is www.txhypnosis.com. I can be reached at 210-885-1917 or wdmoyer@hotmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time, and I always appreciate your time, even when we just talk on the phone.
Absolutely.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you. I thank you.
And thanks, everybody,
Appreciate
for listening.
it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.